Grand Prix of Europe is brought to you on Eurosport by Ford, Formula One's most successful team, in association with Champion, Pioneer, Hitachi, Elf Petrol World Champion, and Goodyear.
Good morning and welcome to a very, very wet Donington Park here in the Midlands of England, where we're looking at the first cars now in official qualifying, first official qualifying, taking to a very, very wet track here at Donington. Yesterday, bright, no sunshine, but at least it was dry. But today, as we watch Yuko Katayama in the Tyrrell Yamaha taking to the circuit, at least it gave a chance for some representative times. We saw the two Williams cars of Prost and Hill dominate the free day of practice to get everyone used to the circuit with 1 minute 13 seconds, but this morning the difference is they were running 13 seconds slower. Ayrton Senna was fastest in free training, 1 minute 26 from Michael Schumacher on 1 minute 28. That is how damp and dismal the circuit is. You can see the problems not only of our camera but for Katayama on the track in the Tyrrell, sliding around on these Goodyears. Goodyear have come up with these new rain tyres now. The front rain tyres have finally been decided upon, having been experimenting all through the early part of the season. But a fantastic debut Grand Prix for Donington, for the new Donington, the first time since 1938 that Grand Prix cars have raced here in Anger. The circuit celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. It opened originally in March 1933. The most famous of its Grand Prix were in 1937 and 1938 when Mercedes and Auto Union dominated proceedings. 1939 they all came back in September for the third of the Grand Prix at Donington, but war broke out while the teams were at the circuit and the German cars were all ordered to go home without the race taking place. So terrible weather conditions here, the circuit right at the end of the main runway of East Midlands Airport. Not helping conditions with the amount of jet fuel that gets dropped here on the circuit. Has always been a problem for the motorcycle Grand Prix in the wet. Jean Alesi, the charismatic French Ferrari driver, taking to the circuit. Now Donington's arrival on the Grand Prix scene this weekend as the culmination of years and years of determined work by Leicester builder Tom Wheatcroft, who's now 70 years old. When he was 15 years old, he saw Nuvolari winning at Donington, and from that day on, he decided he wanted to one day run the British Grand Prix. He's been waiting years for it. He's been in legal battles, but he's eventually got the Grand Prix of Europe this weekend, replacing the race that should have been at Autopolis in Japan. Autopolis went bust, so the race has moved here to Donington Park. And since January, when the race was announced, Wheatcroft has spent £600,000 on further improvements to the circuit, particularly making safety and security better, more runoff areas, improvements to safety walls, and of course improvements to the paddock, to the pits. So perhaps not the greatest reward Tom Wheatcroft might have expected today with this dreadful weather right across the Midlands of England. But at least everyone's had two sessions so far, yesterday and this morning in free training, to get acclimatized to the track, if not to the weather. Alesi picking that Ferrari up by the scruff and neck and just throwing it at the scenery here on this 4-kilometer track. Out comes Schumacher in the new Benetton. This is the new Benetton with its active suspension, semi-automatic gearbox. Outwardly, you won't notice any difference in the car, but inwardly, it's all there under the skin. There we are, 2.5 miles. There is the circuit. It's got that tricky hairpin down at Melbourne, just before they come back onto the start-finish straight. But this, the part we're looking at, Craner Curves, the most fearsome part of the circuit. Notable last October for an enormous accident for Keith O'Dora in the factory Nissan in the touring car shootout, when he went straight on at the bottom of the hill, somersaulted the Nissan over the barriers. Obviously it caused some concern to the Formula One teams, and part of Wheatcroft's improvements over the winter have been to make that area more secure. Michael Andretti had an off in practice yesterday, banged the McLaren into the wall, but he's running today. Now, Andretti had a lot of ground to make up. He's crashed his first 2 Grand Prix this year, most spectacularly in Brazil, as we saw here on Eurosport 2 weeks ago when he and Berger collided. The American IndyCar champion who swapped seats with Nigel Mansell, coming to grips now with the wet at Donington, his first ever time here this weekend, but not McLaren's. McLaren's extensively tested here in 86, 87, and in those days with Prost driving the car. So this is the intelligent McLaren, intelligent gearbox, intelligent suspension, and intelligent drivers, we hope. Alesi fastest at the moment on 1:28, so it's actually slower than it was in this morning's free training. The rain hasn't shown any sign of lifting yet. Low cloud all through the region. Katayama still second on 1:30. Michele Alboreto in the Lola 1:32, and Andretti on his first flying lap now. In fact, Alesi's just speeded up to 26.922. Almost matching Senna's time this morning, so the track fractionally better. Unable to get all the power down, even with all the trick suspension. You can hear the engines not quite on maximum revs. There just isn't any way, even with traction control, of getting all the power down on this particularly greasy track at the moment through the S's. The circuit fairly narrow by comparison with today's standards, and the big problem which Prost and Senna have said